今天已经是3月13号了，你看，还下雪了。昨天也下雪，今天没下了，这样很冷。现在是零下13度，3月13日。看，当当，耶！现在出去走一下。现在我又出去走一走，走它差不多1个小时嘛。现在是差不多下午1点多钟，走到2点多钟回来。Let's go! 1, 2, 3. I love my camera. 喜欢我们那个相机。Let's go！ 又给大家拍一下它的湖面哈，看，开始融化了，看得到水面了。但是啊，这就是我经常来这里，就在我们家附近嘛，走几秒钟就可以到了。虽然零下13度，但是呢没有起风，它就没有那么冷。如果起风呢，就很冷。夏天我会天天带我的狗狗过来。今天呢，现在那个地面那个雪对它那个脚很冷。哎呀，我的 honey，let's go walk 1 hour。let's go。我一般走那边。1、2、3。我喜欢我那个相机。已经春天了嘛，已经还是那么冷啊。北边的加拿大，所以比其他的可能比温哥华要冷多了。我跟你讲啊，你看现在3月份了，4月份一样的，还有这个雪啊。5月份呢，可能要我走哪边呢？我想走那边呢，这算还是走这边吧。5月份呢也是这样，差不多，只是温度稍微可能要暖一点，要好一点。5月底差不多这个雪才慢慢融化完。6月、7月，它就夏天2个月嘛，有时候还不是很热。我基本上都没有开空调，风扇我都没有怎么吹。夏天这边就最多一2天很热，就这样。还有呢。而且夏天很短，就6月、7月、8月，基本上就要开始秋天了。这边秋天最多1个月，就9月份、8、9月份差不多秋天。9月份嘛，就1个月的时间，那个哇很漂亮，树叶黄黄的、金色的秋天嘛。我已经拍过了很多秋天的视频，你可以回头去看一下嘛。所以呢，我一般走这边，因为这个走湖边呢还有点冷，而且没有一个人。我基本上走这边呢，走家属区里面再回去。夏天就可以往那边走。好。有人问我们为什么还没回去啊？你们说你们回中国了，回中国。是的，我们票也买了，老公的那个什么都弄好了，但是呢，他还没有，因为老公工作很忙嘛，他春假嘛，他们都有一个月的假期这边。好。他就利用那个1个月的假期，我们再请假1个月，有时候请假2个月，就回去3个月。这次呢，我们就回去2个月，只请假了1个月，因为狗狗又在家，女儿工作也忙，她还要带小孩，所以我们就这次假期就要短一点，2个月的时间，我们只安排了2个月。到时候我会给大家拍视频哈，不着急。 因为老公还没放假。哎，好冷啊，我的手很冷啊。今天就给大家拍到这里了，我就慢慢走，差不多40分钟走回家。啊，再见呢。到时候回国的时候，会给大家拍很多视频啊，每天都可以看到我们。好的，拜拜。哎，我的手太冷了，因为不能戴手套拿这个相机。好，拜拜。
对台动武来讲啊，如果我们台湾这么落差这么大，志愿役的部队。那么前面
整个国家的格局，跟你在哥本哈根，你有感觉到它
格陵兰5月底以前，
对，
接下来。
今天是2026年3月14号吧，应该15号，3月15号，你看全是雪呀，白雪皑皑啊！我的香肠取下来了，今天，因为我们要准备回国，所以回中国了，所以呢，我要把我的都取下来。现在还是零下10几度，2026年3月15号了，还是零下14度，好像今天。你看，哎呀，干扁扁的了，好干呐、这个。要准备用这些材料给大家做一个那个煲仔饭，好吧？啊，我的大鹅，我要用一个鹅腿来给大家做一个香肠，还有，哎呀，没有腊肉，只有腌肉，因为这个我没有做过一次，去看我的视频嘛，娟子的家乡味，我做过那个腊肉香肠腌的，我这次不想再腌了，很麻烦。来，我的盐肉也可以啦，来看，来，盐肉可以，你放到酱，甜面酱啊，什么酱啊这些哈，就是这样了。哎呦我的妈呀，这么多啊！老公回来取了，干脆。我今天给他做一个那个煲仔饭，所以我想取点下来。哎呀，我的妈呀！来，这也是一个那个鹅，待会儿就用这个鹅腿来给大家做个煲仔饭，好吧？哎，马上回去了。为什么我们还没有回去呢？票早就订好了，我老公的那个visa什么都办好了，但是呢，因为他工作比较忙，要等他放假的时候嘛。哎，因为他马上放假，每年都是老公他们都有春假嘛，每年有春假的时候呢，就有1个月，所以我们就利用这1个月的时间呢，再请假1个月或者2个月，我们就回去差不多2个月、3个月。这次呢，回去2个月，因为我们这边还有一些事情又回来，所以呢，这次回去只有2个月的时间。上次我们回去了3个月哈。哎，每年我们都这样安排的，老公放假就这个时间，因为他其他时间他是工作比较忙哈，直到退休，还有几年他就退休了，我们就会长期住在那边了。哎呀，有这么多肉啊！Oh my god！ 我不知道，我每年都想做一点，因为这边天气又非常好。哎，冬天很冷，不是非常好。过年的时候我必须要做一点。我做了一个腊肉香肠，是秋了很多。我用秋过，你去我的娟子家乡味可以看一下。把它包好，用那个买食品袋把它包装好，再放在冰柜里面，随便多久。好，结束了，应该没有了。一块肉，一个香肠，鹅腿，来做一个煲仔饭给大家，好吧？哎，我们待会儿见喽。哇，还可以，看起来好干哦，干酥酥的这个。好 ，OK， 拜拜 ，See you later。你要把它先泡一下，你太干了，再泡一下哈，你把。我已经把它洗了，煮在锅里面了哈。你要把它，对，要把它先煮一下哈。哎，煮一下以后再做我的那个煲仔饭啊。
全都给你停工扔那儿了。最后还有大招，中远集团下令暂停巴拿马的航运服务，这一下可不得了喽！巴拿马的港口吞吐量暴跌，整个产业链都
是准备我的煲仔饭，这个是煮过的哈，煮过的，直接都空了，
所有人都
没有就用这一点就可以了。
街头。
That India holds every 他们一直定他们的目标，半岛根本无法解决自己。One of the things, one is that
这种米啊，用了两种米，
卡塔的天然气船
都将非常，以及拒绝联合国。
对啊。好，可以。姜黄粉放一点，喜欢。放一点黑胡椒在里面。大家看。
边境旁边有世界上最大的国家，一个欧洲国家，而你们却看不到在长期安全问题上与俄罗斯达成任何妥协的迹象。那种能够为欧洲带来和平。
放了点油，它就不容易粘锅。你要稍稍的把它搅一下。现在就要把这个放下去了。那个鹅腿放在上面了哈。不要再去揭盖。
保护我呢，还是害我呢？这样的声音已经是非常普遍的讨论，尤其是在阿拉伯国家的老百姓当中。你觉得他是支持美国和以色列呢？美国萨德在中东被摧毁，对吧？我们指以色列的情报中心、网络作战中心发动了无人机的定点清除，这个在过去也是难以想象的。以色列的兵棋推演报告，几年前呀，这个报告就美国参联会的那个算法，他们实际上呢也是有所透露。那换言之呢，特朗普呢他是急于澄清。他不希望呢由此引发人受伤，而这里面呢又有大概有10几个这个我们要看清楚这个阶段。华尔街的分析师指出呢，
哎，就这样不停的顺时针给它转一下，来看是这样嘛？烤锅边了，不要老是在锅底啊。油放进去，看看，好，可以了。啊，好漂亮啊！当，打2个鸡蛋，一个也可以哈，一个也可以，但是我想2个。好漂亮啊！再煮一会儿，再煮。管他的，有人说，哎呀，要打仗了，美国要打中国了，又怎么了？打呀，谁怕谁呀？哦，你们还要回去啊？是啊。如果我跟老公讲好了哈。如果真的是打起来了，打仗了，老美要打，中国打老美，是老美打中国，因为日本嘛，日本在那里上蹿下跳的，希望他能安静。好，哎，那要不要看一下？哇，
于是一个母亲啊，不是累啊，你就是再怎么我们跟你什么意识形态不一样，
可以再焖一下那个鸡蛋，我喜欢把它焖，哎，再焖一下鸡蛋。现在每天的新闻都围绕着那个 stupid。
所以呢，这个美国以色列，
美国漂亮小丑国，所以人家说呀要打仗了，老美要打中国了，日本也许会中国和日本跟中国要打起来，打呀，谁怕谁呀？小日本不怕，如果真的是打起来啊，如果真的是打仗了哈，打起来了，我跟老公一定会在中国。我们会做志愿者，我们会做义工，哎，我们会volunteer，哎，我跟老公讲，我说你就是第二个白求恩，加拿大的白求恩，当然你不会艺术 ，OK， 但是你有力气啊，也能帮啊，是吧？哎，我们就这样决定的，谁怕谁啊？打就打吧，我们就回去啊。
我也很奇怪，
说哎呀，打仗了，你们还要回去啊？怕谁呀？
他们到底从哪里拿到了我们的战斧导弹呢？这就是川普的天才。那你想想看，俄罗斯的反应是什么呀？他在考虑要不要加大中东。
对了，开吃。
指出呢，中国一点都不慌中国呢，现如今有非常多的战略高昂的化石能源价格，恰恰在全球范围内极大地加速了中国向清洁能源转型的步伐。64年的8月，美国总统约翰逊接到报告说，美国净流失9.2万个工作岗位过去的裁员潮，股市呢面临着挑战，关税政策被最高法院判处违宪。那当然还有爱泼斯坦案件等等。国内政策工具全部失效，唯一能单方面行动立刻产生新闻效果的，只有军事行动。只要发动战争，以我们的能力就是呢，所谓的巨毕竟对吧？金融市场急剧动荡呢，那美国方面呢受到的冲击自然大。这里呢，更何况包括像比如说通胀问题、石油问题，这个我们讲的比较多了，这里就不再展开。那么另外一方面就是世界多极化会在这样的一次战争当中呢，会更为凸显出来。如果伊朗证明了自己的实力，那么中东地区小霸王或许未来就非伊朗莫属。那这个呢，当然就是会有机会成为多极化其中的一员。那是不是这样呢？还要看伊朗他能不能够在坚持2周的反击之后，他能够坚持2个月甚至2年的时间。他只要坚持时间越久，那么伊朗这家公司就越证明了自己的投资价值。
买米的时候一定要选那个米，不要太粘，不要粘米哈，一定要松的。
他的想法是48个精英斩首，要么就是引起人民推翻政权，要么就是国防军杠上革命卫队，要么就革命卫队自己分裂。我以后不要让军事基地，
韩国泡菜，
你伊朗就直接
在这边买的 ，Costco 买的，
这个效应
我觉得还可以。
那因为以色列，
我跟我女儿他们吃完又买，买了很多了已经。
所以伊朗
这个也很错哟。
哎，
韩国泡菜，
我就让世界经济卷进，或者是用 F-16从空中射增程导弹拦截。也要25万，所以这个就是不对称作战的精华了。所以我耗损你的拦截弹，那等到拦截弹耗损的差不多，它真正的招数才出来，就用导弹，就用欧洲会。为什么欧洲会呢？因为它用极速炸弹，你没有办法拦截。比如他打到特拉维夫的高空，它在空中就爆炸了。
它类似子母弹，
对，那出来的就几10个这样，里面有燃烧弹什么的，跟革命卫队的不合，甚至是革命卫队内部的动乱都没有发生那第二个就是他以为把那个军事的设施都打光了，那大概伊朗顶多1个礼拜就会。
For 27 years, who chaired the national intelligence estimates and also prepared the president's daily briefs. So thank you for coming back. It's been a while.
Glenn, thank you for having me.
So, well, this war against Iran, it's we see it as treated almost as an U.S.-Iranian war, but in reality, it's already a regional war. However, one actor we hear surprisingly little about, given that they're the one who fired the first shot, is Israel. I guess part of the reason is we don't get much video or information about the damages which are being done in Israel. But I thought it could be a good place to start to discuss how vulnerable you think Israel is in this war. And I guess overall, how is the war going for Israel?
Well, Glenn, as usual, you asked the right question. I was going to start out with this if I could, and now I can. This is an existential war for Israel. Iran's going to survive this in one way or another. The U.S. hopefully will. But Israel has put all its eggs in this one basket. They've twisted Donald Trump in such a way that they started this thing, and by the admission of our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who also is the national security advisor to Donald Trump, which means, by the way, that he's the funnel through which all intelligence comes. In other words, the CIA, they report through Marco Rubio, the National Security Council director, okay? And so what Trump gets, he gets through Marco Rubio. That explains part of it. But, I mean, if people don't know this, Marco Rubio admitted that Israel said, oh, we're going to attack. And then they did. And we were afraid that the Iranians would say, oh, maybe the U.S. is guilty of this, and that they would attack us back. And so we had to preempt a retaliatory attack from Iran, retaliating because Israel attacked it. He said that. It's right out there, okay? My God. Well, just to reduce this from the sublime to the mundane, we have an adult young girl who helps us out here, and she was here this morning. I said, please, Rosanna, tell me, what are your friends all saying about this war? And they said, oh, well, they don't like it at all. And the thing that they don't like is there's no plan. There's no plan at all. And how can they do this without any plan? I said, okay, fine. Well, why did he do it? Now, my daughter is really smart. Like she went to college and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. So what do your friends say about that? They don't, all they care about is Trump won't rule out sending our troops, our sons or brothers. But why did he do it then? Don't know. It's crazy. It's crazy. And I said, Rosanna, you don't know it because the majority of American people don't know it, even though the Secretary of State of the United States has said it, because Israel attacked Iran and mousetrapped us into doing precisely the same thing when we were this close to a deal. Now, how does McGovern know that? Come on, McGovern. I don't see that in the New York Times. Well, was a mediator in these very crucial talks in Geneva between the Americans and the Iranian foreign minister, okay? And when the mediator, the Omani foreign minister, that is the foreign minister of Oman, who was the honest broker here and dealing with the two, when that session was finished, he got on a plane and went to Washington and said to the vice president, we almost have a deal. The Iranians have really backed off on their requirements about enrichment. They're making all kinds of concessions. Matter of fact, we might even get UN inspectors there for the first time in history. So, it is close. And then, I think because he smelled a rat, he went on Margaret Brennan, CBS person, and told her the same thing. We're really close now. I'm elated. Now, that was the 27th of February. It was the 26th that they had met in Geneva with this same Omani foreign minister mediating, if I have to say that again, okay? What happened? All of a sudden, within hours after getting this news, Rubio, first and foremost, there was the attack on Iran. So how does this figure? I mean, there are complaints now. The latest one is that the Omanis and others think that Witkoff and Kushner lied when they gave their report to the president, saying, no, the Iranians are intransigent. I don't rule that out. The two of them are in the Bronx, we call them shysters, okay? They can't be trusted. But in any case, the deal was this close, okay? All of a sudden, Rubio and maybe, Hexeth for sure, maybe the vice president say, no, Bibi has already launched his attack. We'll do it for Israel. So I said to my daughter, look, you ought to ask the last question. Why, if all this had no planning and all that, why did we did it? And that you should realize that the reason none of you even think of the question is because it's not in the news. It's not in the Times or the Post or even online. It's very rarely said that we got in this war for Israel. Now, just to let me tie up this dissertation here. For Israel now, it's an existential war. That means that they are about to be obliterated, pardon the term, okay? The Iranians have the wherewithal to do that. That was proven in June, and that naively thought, this would never happen. I mean, would Trump want to risk obliteration of Israel, closing of the Straits or Hormuz, losing the election in November, having gas prices at $10 again? I mean, of course, he wouldn't be so stupid or dumb to start a war against Iran. And he did it. So, two things here. We have a president, not only a delusional narcissist, but I'd suggest that he's wahnsinnig. Okay, now, I know you Norwegians don't like to use German terms and all that, but I know German. All I know is Tusendank in Norwegian, okay? Wahnsinn in German. I mean, it's just off your rocker, okay? An inflated kind of thought that you can do what the hell you want, okay? Wahnsinnig is almost as bad as verrückt, which means really crazy, and which, when I lived in Germany, you could be convicted for calling somebody verrückt, okay? Well, I'm not in Germany. That's what we have here. And just to tie this up, I've spent a half century trying to put myself in the shoes of Kremlin leaders. I know that they have a equivalent of the branch we had, now it's a division in the CIA, which did at a distance psychological profiles, okay? At a distance, well, you can't interview Trump, but you can get all the information together. And even though the psychiatrists don't like to do this without having access, well, you do it anyway. Why? Because the stakes are so high. Now, when I was on board at the CIA, we have wonderful people working on this. I had a biographical profile on Chernyankov and Andropov and later and on Gorbachev. So the Kremlin, I'm sure, has this kind of unit. Now, it boggles my mind to put myself in the place of a Gorbachev president's daily briefer, which I was one-on-one during Reagan's first term, 81 to 85. What are they going to tell Putin? Well, we know this guy is unreliable, that he's deceitful, and that he tells a lot of lies, and he's kind of narcissistic, but now we know he's wahnsinnig. Now we know he's verrückt, and what will he do? Last thing here. Maybe I'm projecting here, but I thought they would never do this stupid thing for precisely the reasons of what's happening now, okay? So when people talk about putting boots on the ground or threatening to use a nuclear weapon. I say, oh, I would never do that because. But the becauses don't matter anymore. The logic does not obtain. And maybe this is, I'll just add this. In Kremlinology, we had a very sustained, orderly way of analyzing public media. And when people were saying things like X, Y, Z would be preconditions for negotiations or for a settlement, and then all of a sudden, all they said was X, and they didn't mention Y and Z, oh wow. That meant, and I can tell you, this is accurate, that meant that they were willing to deal on intermediate nuclear forces, and that deal was made, and it obtained for 32 years, okay? We saw that they're backing off from public statements, but it doesn't work with Trump. Trump can say, hey, we require A, B, C, and D, and then he says 5 times, we require A, doesn't mention it, and his vice president says, we require A 4 times in 4 minutes on Fox. McGovern thinks, oh my God, maybe there's a little bit of hope there. Forget about it, McGovern. Kremlinology and logic do not obtain in analyzing Donald Trump. And that is a real burden for the presidential daily briefers of Vladimir Putin. I think you will agree.
But sorry, but when you say it's existential for Israel, that's usually a word you don't want to hear when it comes to powerful states, because once something existential, they can't afford defeat, which then begs the question: what might Israel do? Because we're in a very difficult position. The Iranians as well consider this to be an existential threat, and they can't just let the U.S. walk away and then reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and then in 6 months the U.S. and Israel is back yet again. And given that none of the underlying problems have been resolved, the objective will remain to knock out Iran from the Eurasian chessboard. So, given that this is the case, the Iranians can't afford to let this one go without go back to the old status quo. So what does this mean for Israel? Because if they risk being decimated here, they have nuclear weapons. They don't strike me as the most restrained of countries, as we've seen in all of the wars currently ongoing as well. So what do you think Israel's going to do if the pain becomes too great? I mean, at the moment, we're not seeing any pictures coming out of Israel. They want to project the idea that, they're not taking that big losses. But, this could flip at some point where they want to do the exact opposite, show how much destruction Iran has done. At that point in time, one risks starting to hear more about possible nuclear weapons, retaliation. The Israel has a right to survive, essentially, the right to exist. There's a lot of crazy things happening these days. This doesn't seem that crazy that it would happen. If not with strategic nuclear weapons, at least something limited with tactical, just to essentially force the arms of the Iranians to do as they're told, to capitulate, essentially. Do you see a pathway there towards actual use of nuclear weapons?
Glenn, that's your second most interesting and appropriate question. That's what I was going to say. Yes. When I look at Netanyahu and Trump, but in this case, primarily Netanyahu, I ask myself, okay, given what you know about this fellow McGovern and what he's willing to do in terms of genocide, forced starvation, when he's been given to believe that he has some sort of handle on Trump, maybe it has a lot to do with Jeffrey Epstein, but anyhow, he's confident that he has his handle on Trump. Well, would he accept defeat? Would he say, okay, it was a bad idea? I don't think so. And I don't think the Iranians would let him do that now that they have the upper hand. And that's the big new reality. I think it's been proven now that the Iranians have more weapons, more rockets, more missiles, and the Iranians are going to prevail in this thing. Not to mention the damage that is happening to the whole world because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which was entirely predictable. So, what's Netanyahu going to do? Well, Cy Hirsch wrote a book a couple of decades ago about the Samson option, the biblical narrative being that when Samson pulled the temple down rather than capitulate or whatever, he just pulled the whole temple down. Would Netanyahu do that, thinking that maybe he could fly off to Berlin again and hide in one of those little shelters? I don't know, but I think the chances are more than even, and this is scary as hell, that he would not stop before he used, not just threatened, but used a nuclear weapon or two. And whether that would work or not, I just don't think it would. And the opprobrium, he would be crowned as the rogue state of the world forever if he did that. And nobody would cooperate with him, I don't think, unless maybe people like, neocons coming out of the woodwork that supported both the war in Iraq as well as this war in Iran would support Netanyahu. So, yeah, as a long-winded answer to say that 4 weeks ago, I drew a parallel. I said, look, I think that Netanyahu would probably use this nuclear option in extremis, okay? Fancy words for was really having his back up against the wall. That's why it's new, Glenn, as you know as a historian, and I know as an old guy. Not since the Cuban Missile Crisis has any nuclear state been forced in extremis, okay? Now, John Kennedy, one of my idols, President John F. Kennedy, who brought me down to Washington, together with a whole bunch of really great people, saying, well, we could do something for our country. And some of us are still around. What he said in his major speech at the University of Maryland in early 1963 was this: the thing that must be avoided in our relations between two nuclear powers, that is, U.S. and the Soviet Union at the time, is never, ever to force a choice on a nuclear power, a choice between humiliating retreat and using those nuclear weapons. Now, why do you say that? Because it almost happened. If he hadn't been adroit enough to dismiss his generals and go with his brother Bobby and other people like Llewellyn Thompson, the previous ambassador, they said, look, Khrushchev is willing to do a deal. Talk to him directly, and they did. And there was no war, and you and I today get to talk about these things, okay? It was that close. So that was September, October 1962. Here, John Kennedy is in June 10th, 1963. Count the months between, and now he says, look, we've been through the worst. I know what it's like to think about blowing up the world. The last thing you want to do is have to choose another nuclear power with a choice between humiliating retreat and using nuclear weapons. Now, Khrushchev, Gott sei Dank, or Slava Bogu, thank God, was adroit enough to say, okay, if we make it look like a deal that you're pulling the Euro missiles out of Turkey, yeah, I could talk to my military and say, well, we got a deal, and that happened. So Kennedy was hell-bent and determined not to let that happen again. And so he reached out to the Russians. He said, look, our children breathe the same air. We want the same good things for our children. We, among all the powers of the world, Russia and the United States have never been at war together, almost uniquely. So let's deal. And of course, he said, we're going to cease testing nuclear weapons, And within months, because of adroit political actions, the Senate confirmed a partial test ban treaty. So what I'm saying is that this goes back to the beginning of the real nuclear confrontational age. And since then, since 1962, there has been no likelihood that the US or the Soviet Union would overstep that red line and threaten the other with a humiliating retreat. Now, what was the next big issue? Russiagate. Now, as you know, my friends and I and veteran intelligence professionals for sanity knew that that was a distrustful, dishonest thing from the get-go. Well, one of my colleagues said, Ray, you know, you're a one-act pony, right? Why do you keep focusing on this? And then a radio guy says, well, why do you keep pounding on it? It's because Russia has nuclear weapons. That's why. So, oh, yeah. Ukraine was judged to be an existential threat to Russia. And we know how that's coming out, okay? Luckily, that's not going to be a nuclear explosion. So all I'm saying here is that this is unique. Since the Cuban Missile Crisis, do the math, that was 1962. What is it, 2026 now? So we have a state now that stole nuclear technology from the United States, whose prime minister was one of the thieves that stole that technology. And one of the reasons that John Kennedy was so disliked by our military and by our Zionists was because he wanted to prevent Israel from getting a nuclear weapon. Some people think, and I think there's some evidence for this, that's one of the reasons they got rid of him. Let's face it, the chief plotter, who's the CIA counterintelligence master, the chief plotter was the liaison with Israel, and nothing I or any of my colleagues or my branch people wrote, if it mentioned Israel, even if it was just about Sino-Soviet relations, if it just mentioned Israel, we had to get it cleared with this guy. So he was the one that was the ringleader of all this. And of course, he was like this with Israel. So there's ample evidence that James Angleton, was involved in both of these escapades, so close to Israel, and so much a part of getting rid of John Kennedy, partly because of his resistance to Israel getting a nuclear weapon. There's even evidence that Angleton was participating in at least turning a blind eye to the provision or the stealing of nuclear technology under Kennedy's back or behind Kennedy's back. So, it's just, so that just rest my case here and just say, look, if very educated 50-year-old children of mine are just completely adrift at saying, oh my God, there's no plan, and why did he do this? And though they don't ask why he did it, they always say, oh, it could be this, our boots on the ground, or oh my God, but none of them have time to ask why Trump did this. And why Trump did this was because he's subservient to Israel, and that may include this heinous, talk about moral turpitude. Well, you got it in spades with Epstein and the people that Trump has been associating with, and the fact that Netanyahu is certainly not above bringing his own little portfolio of photos and videos to Mar-a-Lago, say, now we just want to remember, if the FBI is able to block out a lot of this stuff, but, we have the, just we'll protect it, Mr. President, unless you don't cooperate. That's a mafia-type approach, And would Trump be above that? I don't think so. So sorry for this long explanation, but I feel really strongly about this because Israel has had this hold on us to the tune of shooting up 34 U.S. sailors on the USS Liberty during the 1967 war and never being held accountable. Then, of course, they learned without any doubt that they could literally get away with murder, and the Senate and the House and even the U.S. Navy would cover it up.
Meet EM Sense, a breakthrough in foot therapy that wraps around your foot and ankle like a therapeutic boot.
Well, the U.S.-Israeli relationship is quite interesting, not just in terms of understanding a lot of U.S. foreign policy, but it's also interesting now to see what's happening in the domestic politics, because I think especially, well, not just on the Republican, but the Democrat side is the split you see now, that the sympathies towards Israel have declined so much. And also within Trump's own camp, this whole idea of America first, I think it united a very broad variety of people. And a large part of this group believed that America first meant that U.S. interests would be put before Israel. So now that they see this war, which they can't really explain without talking about Israel, it's something that also divides the home base of Donald Trump. But you said something interesting, though. That is, yes, it's an existential conflict for Iran and for Israel, but for the U.S., it's not really existential. However, that being said, there's a lot at stake here. That is its credibility as a superpower. Also, if this war is lost, the Gulf states might no longer be viable frontline states. They could be swept away, or alternatively, if they want to survive, they might, come to the conclusion that, being a frontline state does not make you safe. It makes you more vulnerable. If this happens, the whole petrodollar system begins to fall apart without these recycled dollars. The AI bubble, the AI race comes to an end. Alliance systems around the world could be challenged. Also in domestic politics, this would be a disaster for Trump. He already declared victory, a little bit like George Bush's, mission accomplished moment, which he came to regret. Of course, and his ego on top of all of this. So I can't imagine Trump accepting defeat. That being said, I can't imagine him using nuclear weapons either, but he has other options, though. I mean, what I'm getting at, I saw two comments come out, I think, on the same day. That is, we're going to hit Iran 20 times harder, but also we run out of targets to hit, which then suggests, how do you bring Iran to the negotiation table, make them make concessions? It just sounds, that they need the Gaza treatment, that this is the direction that the U.S. might go. Anyways, that's too much of my my thoughts. I was wondering, how do you see this? What will the U.S. do now that it didn't get the regime change? It didn't get the people standing up, going against the government. The army did not collapse. The Iranians are able to absorb pain and also to bring pain to the U.S., the Gulf states, and Israel.
Well, let's deal with the Gulf states, the Arab states first. Putin got on the phone just 2 days after the attacks and talked to each and every one of them. What is that all about? Well, I think he knew what was coming and said, look, recall that you've been real cozy with the United States and buying all the weapons and all that stuff. You have this deal where they're going to defend you, huh? Watch the next couple of days and see what happens. I'll call you back later. Whew, my God. That deal has fallen apart because the defense against Iran has completely been gone. Iran has full reign now, and they are doing it. They are attacking all these U.S. bases and trying to reassure the Gulf states that, look, this is not about you. It's just about your stupid policymakers who thought that the U.S. could protect you, and they can't. So what are you going to do now, huh? So what are you going to do now? You do have a lot of riches. Who are you going to trust to deal with? Americans? Well, see what happens the next couple of days, okay? Well, the next day, you have Lavrov getting up. Now, this is really interesting. He's in a meeting with other Arab Gulf leaders, right? And he says, so, very clever. I will use an old Bedouin expression. Have you not learned that you cannot ride two camels at the same time? I don't know who gave him that line, but it's exactly the right line, okay? So as far as I'm concerned, the U.S. are not going to get bases back in these Gulf countries. The Gulf countries still have their oil to the degree that they're not obliterated, these sites, so they still have the wherewithal to persist. But are they going to throw their lot in with the United States? Certainly not in the way they used to, okay? Now, I forget what else you got into, but I had some comments on your other remarks to see if I made I want you to mention this, that one of the things that most Americans don't understand, because many were not of age in 2001, 2002, and 2003. All they know is about 9/11, right? And then they know,
should these transforming glasses be made illegal in Canada? Nobody believed me at first, but now everybody wants them.
Or think they know that we had to go after people who might have been responsible for 9/11. And the Afghans, well, that was one thing. But we tried to identify the head of Iraq, Saddam Hussein, with 9/11. And how did we do that? We said that Saddam Hussein had ties, active ties, with Al-Qaeda. 75% of the American people in 2002, 2003 thought that to be true, okay? Colin Powell spoke authoritatively at the UN, and he talked about a, quote, sinister nexus between Baghdad, Saddam Hussein, and Al-Qaeda. Colin Powell knew that he was lying. He said it anyway. What was the other thing? Oh, yes. Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Now, we veteran intelligence professionals for sanity set up our unit in January of 2003 in full knowledge that they didn't have weapons of mass destruction, that our former colleagues were lying through their teeth to get promoted and bonus awards, which they got for writing that terrible estimate October 1, 2002. So what happened? Well, they falsified the evidence, and you don't have to, let me just quote the Senate Intelligence Committee report. This was 5 years in the making. In June of 2008, they finally came to their conclusion, and it read, quote, the intelligence used to justify the attack on Iraq was uncorroborated, unsubstantiated, contradicted, or even non-existent, end quote. Non-existent? What the hell does non-existent intelligence look like? Well, I don't have to tell you, okay? It was manufactured, okay? So why do I raise all this stuff? It's happening again. And most people are not cognizant of the fact because the press has concealed it and no one was ever held accountable for Iraq. So it's worth mentioning. What we're saying now is, of course, depending on who you listen to, Iran with the N. Now, Iran is close to getting a nuclear weapon, okay? What are they going to do? They're going to give it to those terrorists. All those terrorists, which I call resistance forces, according to international law, in Lebanon and elsewhere. Those terrorists are going to those nuclear weapons, And again, don't take McGovern's word for this. we had the real good fortune of having a copy of the authentic notes of a briefing given by Sir Richard Dearlove, head of Britain's MI6, to Tony Blair on July 23rd, 2002. And what was that all about? Well, Tony Blair had been recruited by Bush to join in this war. It's going to be a great war. The other Europeans, well, they weren't real. The Germans and the French, forget about them. We can do it by ourselves, okay? But you know what? When you're planning a war, you like to be more than just telephone contact with the other plotter, right? So even though Bush was calling Blair or vice versa once a week, Blair said to his intelligence chief, look, would you go over and talk to George Tenet, which was his opposite number, Director of Central Intelligence, head of all intelligence agency? Talk to him because he's so close to Bush. He'll know the real thing. Can you talk to him? Well, Tenet didn't want any part of that. I said, no, I don't. And Bush insisted. And so I know, there were people I know there. On the 20th of July, 2003, at CIA headquarters in Langley, and Sir John Dearlove was thoroughly briefed, got on the next aircraft, went back home to London, and 3 days later, at a meeting of the 12 apostles at 12, his big cabinet meeting there, Blair's cabinet meeting with all the major dignitaries. Okay, now, Sir Richard Dearlove, please tell us what the real scoop is. And this is what it was. This is a quote from the most operative paragraph. George W. Bush has decided to attack Iran. It will be justified by the conjunction of weapons of mass destruction and terrorism. My comment.
If you frequently need to go to the bathroom late at night, we recommend eating 2 pieces daily. If you need to visit the bathroom multiple times at night, this can be used as a meal replacement.
Translation, we're going to say that Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction. He's going to give them to terrorists, okay? And then the final sentence of this paragraph, but the intelligence and facts are being fixed around the policy, period, end quote. So the intelligence and the facts were being fixed around the policy. Now, what's my lesson here? An unnecessary war, completely unnecessary. Intelligence fixed around the policy. That's what we got now. That's what we have now with respect to Iran. Why? Because no one was ever held accountable. Those senators that wrote that bona fide, accurate, authentic report saying some of the intelligence was non-existent, never held anybody accountable. George Tenet was allowed to go to his shelter in New Jersey and still get lots of money from the corporate entities that he ostensibly works for. No one is held accountable. The people who wrote that national intelligence estimate of October 1, 2002, got pay increases and pay bonuses. So now, it's not quite that bad, because what's really interesting here with respect to Iran is that after that debacle, people who had some sense in Washington saw that the neocons, the Cheney and Bush, wanted to do Iran next. Matter of fact, the neocons were openly saying to everyone who would listen, real men go to Tehran, not to Baghdad, right? They had the plans, okay? They were going to justify it by the same reasons. And what happened? Somebody says, let's get a national intelligence estimate done. Now, I think I've said this on your program before, but long story short, they got an honest guy from the State Department named Tom Finger. He came in with his own people. They worked for a whole year. They benefited from some luck with new intelligence, and they said Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and has not resumed work on a nuclear weapon. We say that unanimously, all 16 intelligence agencies at the time, and we say that with high confidence. Now, The good news is that the intelligence community has reiterated that judgment to include the fact that nuclear weapons are prohibited by the supreme leader, recently deceased, by a fatwa, which means a hell of a lot more than an encyclical or any other high-sounding religious statement, okay? Now, how long did they stand by that authentic judgment after all the pressure from the lobby and from, my God, as recently as, look at it, it's March, right? Last March, the end of March, Tulsi Gabbard, the National Intelligence Director, repeated verbatim what the U.S. intelligence community had been saying since November 2007, namely that they stopped, that is, Iran, if it had a nuclear program at all, stopped at the end of 2003, unanimous, high confidence, no reversion of the fatwa. Oh, she said that under oath in congressionally required testimony in March of last year. Where is Tulsi Gabbard? Oh, wow. A friend of mine did a little cartoon with a milk carton, 2.5 or half a gallon milk carton missing. Tulsi Gabbard, tell us where, if you see her, let her. So what's going to happen now? That is congressionally required. What will happen when they come before the Senate, do their oath, and are asked, well, what do you think now? Did Iran start working on a nuclear weapon and you never told us? And the honest answer would be no. They don't need a nuclear weapon. They have the kind of hypersonic missiles that can deliver heavy warheads, and I dare say, Glenn, that they'll be doing precisely that in the next few weeks. Iran's not going to stop. And as Alex Craner, one of the best analysts in all this, when he talks about the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, he says, you ain't seen nothing yet. And that's gonna hurt all of us, but it's gonna hurt especially what Trump thinks he can do, because he can't do much. The only thing he could do, presumably, but maybe not, is restrain Netanyahu from using the ace in the hole, which you correctly called attention to, using a nuclear weapon or two.
Let me just one final brief question. That is the hopes of regime change. Is this out the door now? Because again, the core of a regime change operation would also entail, winning the hearts and minds of the people and have them turn against their own government. But after killing their leader, which is, this was not celebrated as it was for some reason believed it would be, but also as the U.S. runs out of military targets, we see more civilian targets to put pressure on the government. So we saw the attacks on the desalination plant, the fuel depots, which then polluted and destroyed the air essentially in Tehran. The destruction of the capital. And Trump also, just to really drive the point home, went out on Truth Social and wrote that, they would hit Iran so hard that the nation itself would be destroyed, that it would be unable to rebuild. And of course, I assume accidentally, but of course the killing of those 168 young girls as well, and then lie about it in such an obvious way. Is now regime change completely out the question?
Well, any kind of regime change is out of the question if you're thinking about a more malleable management there in Iran. You don't have to be a crackerjack analyst to figure it out. The new supreme leader was in the house and he was injured when his father was killed, his wife was killed, his teenage son was killed, he was spared, but apparently he's still in the hospital. That's why you don't see him, okay? So under those circumstances, and under what was said in his name, or what he said yesterday, there is no give at all in the Iranian position. They have the upper hand now. You know, when you talk about our military leaders, I'll tell you one thing that comes from Larry Wilkerson, who worked with Colin Powell, not only as his chief of staff, not only as his chief of staff in the State Department, but also when Powell was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and when he was National Security Advisor to Bush, the first Bush. So what he said was, at one point, Powell turned to me and he said, Larry, oh God, the worst thing you can do is make an Air Force general head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, because all they know is bombing, and it's sailing off again and bombing some more. And if we didn't learn that from World War II, if we didn't learn that from Vietnam, if we didn't learn that from Afghanistan and Libya, oh my God, so never pray for an Air Force general to be head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Now, where did Trump get this guy? Well, the smart people say, well, he was retired, but before he retired, he appeared in this nice blue uniform, except he didn't have his cap on. He had a MAGA hat on. And Trump said, oh my God, he took a shine to him right away. What's this guy like? My God. If he has an ounce of honesty in him, he's got to tell Trump, look, we warned, that is my colleagues on the Joint Chiefs, that they said that this might not work. But I don't know whether there is an ounce of honesty in him. It's not working, okay? And if the military can't restrain Trump in his present mind, my God, I don't know who can. We have neocons now appearing. David Wormser. We have Douglas Feith, the brain trust, so to speak, behind Cheney's war against Iraq, coming out and making idiot pronouncements. So the neocons still live. They're still given a lot of leeway in the press, and they get their op-eds printed. So I'm a little bit forgetting now exactly what your point was. Let me ask you if you could repeat your main question there, and I'll try to be more brief.
Yeah, no, if regime change is now out of the question, and yeah.
Start your mornings with a special chair Tai Chi program focused on muscle strength building, adapted for...
Well, if it's out of the question and the Iranians are not willing to deal with Trump, and you can understand why they might not be willing to deal with Trump. I mean, 2 times right away, while negotiations were nearing completion, they were tricked into, there was an attack. Okay, 2 times. So was it that George W. Bush said, oh, fool me once, fool me twice? He couldn't get it right? Yeah. Well,
never fool me no more.
Yeah. So the Iranians say, fool me once? Well, we never thought you'd try to fool me twice, but you did. But we're ready this time. We're ready this time. Fool me thrice? Fool me 3 times? Give me a break. So they have the upper hand. Now, are there forces for moderation here? And there are. The Russians and the Chinese can come in and support the new Ayatollah, the new supreme leader. He's not quite an Ayatollah yet, I'm told. And say, look, Mr. Trump, when you called me, says Putin, when you called me just 3 days ago, I made the best of it. I had Ushakov say that And we had a business-like and a constructive, but and also a open, frank discussion. So I'm not cutting off ties with you, but you know what? This is crazy. We're not going to let this happen. You say, oh, please use your good offices with Iran. Forget about it. You say, please don't give Iran intelligence that they need. Mr. Trump, have you heard? Do you know what the word karma means? Look it up. Karma. What are you guys doing with the Ukrainians? Huh? We're not going to stop our aid to Iran. So we're going to have to make a deal. Now, short term, midterms, that's one thing. The topsy-turvy in the economy with the Strait of Hormuz continues to be closed. That's bedlam, okay? So, Mr. Trump, we can help you, but you're going to have to lay off and you're going to have to restrain Israel. Now, we Russians, says Putin, have a unique chance to mediate this thing. We have good ties, reasonable good ties with Israel. I mean, there are 2 million Russians in Israel, right? And of course, we have very good ties with Iran, good ties with China. We have a lot to offer here, but you're going to have to, however we kind of make this look better than it is, you're going to have to back off. And the sooner you back off, the sooner you'll lose less in the midterm elections. And so we're willing to help, but Iran doesn't want any help from us or anybody else right now. They're winning. So, well, let's wait a while. And yeah, come back to us, and we will try to be honest brokers. Now, can they do that? Well, you know, they almost had a mutual defense treaty with Iran. It was the Iranians that said no. God's sake, that shows. Now, let's reflect on that. The Russians wanted to make their strategic treaty with Iran a mutual defense treaty. And it was the Iranians that said, no, we're not ready for that. I think they probably regret that now. But that shows how important Iran is to Russia. I mean, it's the soft underbelly through which all kinds of terrorism and other threats come, okay? So that's one thing. The other thing, what else was I going to say here? Oh, yeah, well, you know, they abstained on this resolution at the UN yesterday. I was appalled. I mean, you can't condemn. I mean, you can't vote against a measure that criticizes Ukraine. I mean, criticizes Iran and doesn't even mention that they were attacked. But now why did they abstain? Well, I think that they're just trying to preserve what's left of an image of being able to be honest brokers. They want to be in a position to be able to say, okay, you know, we might have vetoed that thing, but, you know, we're trying to work things out. And the stakes are very high, not least of which, of course, is the continued human destruction exemplified by those little girls in Minab, as well as the threat that Netanyahu will be tempted to use one of his words. You know, thinking about Minab, Glenn, I had a poem that I had from Daniel Berrigan, a good friend of mine, that I recited on another platform, but I have another one now from a very close Iranian woman poetess. Her name is Avide. It would take about a minute plus to read. She is addressing the little girls of Minab. I don't know if we have another minute where I could.
No, of course.
It's okay? Okay. The title is In Memoriam. Where were your dreams? Where were your hopes, sweet little girls of Minab? Were you to be the new blooms of the tulips or the daffodils, sweet little girls of Minab? Were you fasting, hungry, thirsty? sweet little girls of Minap. When the tomahawk blew you to smithereens, then burnt you to ashes without leaving a trace of you, my angels, my beautiful, sweet little girls of Minap. Tell me, who has the heart? Who has so much hatred in their hearts to burn to ashes, sweet little girls of Minap? With hopes and dreams as tulips and daffodils swaying under the blue dome of a sky, innocently hoping and waiting for a new spring to arrive. Tell me, who has so much hatred? Who has so much hatred in their hearts? Now, from the sublime to the mundane, we know how that happened. We know who killed the sweet little girls of Minap. His name is Hegseth. He calls himself the Secretary of War. Why can I pin the blame on him? Because he deleted the unit in the Pentagon that verifies that there'll be no civilian casualties in this target list. Blaming the Defense Intelligence Agency or outdated target lists does not suffice. There was a way to check on those things. There was a procedure. And Peter Hegseth, Secretary of War, who says, have no mercy, deleted that unit. Now, how do I know that? Scott Ritter knows chapter and verse on this. And he has pointed out that there were 4 strikes from tomahawks, and then another one had the ability to loiter over the scene, send back photography to control tower. Control tower goes back, yep, there are other people coming on. Oh, look, there are a lot of people. These were the little girls going into the prayer shelter, okay? And the parents coming to pick them up, vaporized. Why? Because there were thermobaric capabilities within that 5th.
The shadow of Jesus Christ, the tabernacle.
Tomahawk. So, you know, it's okay to be a little bit angry about this thing. And when I see the President of the United States say, no, the Iranians did it themselves, that was a physical, that was a temporal impossibility. And I could say that because this was the first wave of the attack on February 28th, the same wave where the supreme leader was killed in his own home, not in a deep shelter, okay? Same wave, and it happened before the Iranians even know there was something coming. So the Iranians are going to be firing off inaccurate missiles at a school before they even know they're under attack. Give me a break. So what we have is a meretricious, that's a nice way of saying, a lion son of a gun as president, and Hegseth saying, oh no, we're investigating. You're right. Hegseth is going to investigate what he himself is personally responsible for, a man who gives no quarter and who says, show no mercy. That's what we've become. And American citizens need to realize that, need to apportion blame where it belongs. And when you kill 163 little girls between the ages of 6 and 12, you must be held accountable.
I very much agree. It's that's one of the startling things, that the brutality is so celebrated now, that this idea that, Hegseth says even following the rules of engagement is somehow politically correct, something, which prevents us from being strong. It's quite grotesque. And if you're on Twitter, if you follow the White House, every day almost they put out the little videos where they make clips of video games with the bombing of Iran. It's war porn. It's celebration of violence. It's something very ugly, especially coming from the White House. But here we are. It looks like imperial decline can be ugly indeed. So thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you for inviting me, Glenn.